Milwaukee issued a report showing that 53.3% of working-age black men in Milwaukee are jobless, the highest ever reported. The figure is 60% in Detroit. Black unemployment rates have been breaking records nationwide with scarcely any notice. Data released by the Community Service Society in New York show that only 25% of young black men in New York City actually have a job. Now, I wish I could say that's the worst of it, but it's not. And I promise to tell you the truth and to do my best to tell you the truth as boldly and directly as Dr. King once did when few were willing to hear it or even listen. So here it is. During the past 30 years, a vast new system of racial and social control has emerged from the ashes of slavery and Jim Crow. It is a system of mass incarceration that no doubt have Dr. King turning in his grave today. The systematic mass incarceration of poor people of color in the United States is tantamount to a new caste system. It transfers young people from decrepit, underfunded communities to brand new high-tech prisons. This system locks poor people, overwhelmingly poor people of color, into a permanent second-class status nearly as effectively as earlier systems of racial and social control once did. It is the moral equivalent of Jim Crow. Now, I admit in the introduction to my book that there was a time when I rejected this kind of talk out of hand, just dismissed it. In fact, there was a time when I thought that people who made comparisons between mass incarceration and slavery or mass incarceration and Jim Crow were engaging in exaggerations, distortions, blowing things way out of proportion. In fact, I thought people who made those kinds of claims and comparisons and arguments were actually doing more harm than good to efforts to reform our criminal justice system and achieve greater racial equality in the United States. But what a difference a decade makes. For after years of representing victims of racial profiling and police brutality and investigating patterns of drug law enforcement in poor communities of color, and attempting to assist people who have been released from prison re-enter into a society that had never shown much use for them in the first place, I had a series of experiences that began what I now call my awakening. I began to awaken to a racial reality that is so obvious to me now that what stuns me in retrospect is that I had managed to be blind to it for so long. I described my conclusion in the introduction to the book where I write, what has changed since the collapse of Jim Crow has less to do with the basic structure of our society than the language we use to justify it. In the era of colorblindness, it is no longer socially permissible to use race explicitly as a justification for discrimination, exclusion, and social contempt. So we don't. Rather than rely on race, we use our criminal justice system to label people of color criminals and then engage in all the practices that we supposedly left behind. Today, it is perfectly legal to discriminate against criminals in nearly all the ways in which it was once legal to discriminate against African Americans. Once you're labeled a felon, the old forms of discrimination, employment discrimination, housing discrimination, denial of the right to vote, exclusion from jury service, suddenly legal. As a criminal, you have scarcely more rights and arguably less respect than a black man living in Alabama at the height of Jim Crow. We have not ended racial caste in America, we have merely redesigned it. But like I said, I didn't reach this conclusion overnight. It was a process, sometimes a painful one. One experience in particular I'll never forget involved a young 19-year-old African-American man. Walked into my office and he changed the way I viewed not only the criminal justice system, but myself as a civil rights lawyer working within it. At the time, I was directing the Racial Justice Project for the ACLU in California, and we had launched a major campaign against racial profiling. We called it the DWB campaign, or the Driving While Black or Brown campaign. And we had already sued the California Highway Patrol for racial profiling and their drug interdiction practices, but we were looking to sue some other police departments as well, where we had received complaints of discriminatory police practices. So we created a hotline number that people could call if they believe they had been stopped or targeted by the police on the basis of race. And we put this hotline number up on billboards and put them in neighborhoods in Oakland and San Jose and other cities around California. And within the first few minutes after we announced the hotline on the evening news, we received thousands of calls. Our system crashed temporarily. We had to expand our capacity. And so I was spending my day interviewing one young black man after another who were telling stories of being stopped, searched, sometimes brutalized for no apparent reason other than their race. And this young man walks into the office with a stack of papers about this thick. He had taken detailed notes of his encounters with the police over about a 9-month period of time in his neighborhood in Oakland. Just detailed notes describing every stop, every incident, and he had names of officers, witnesses, in some cases badge numbers, just an extraordinary amount of detail and documentation. And the stories he was telling me were corroborated by other stories I'd heard about what was going on in his neighborhood. And on top of that, he was a good-looking young man. He was a good-looking young man, charismatic, and I started to think, here is our dream plaintiff. Here's the one we've been looking for. He's the one who can be the face of the litigation that we plan to file against the Oakland Police Department. And so I'm getting excited, and we're talking, he's telling me more, I'm sharing information, and then he says something that makes me pause. I said, what did you say? What did you just say? Did you just say, you're a drug felon? And he gets quiet, and he stares down for a minute, and he says, yeah, I'm a drug felon, but let me tell you what happened. The police planted drugs on me, and they set up me and my friend, and they beat us up. And he starts telling me this whole story about how he was framed by the police, and the police planted drugs on him and his friend, and starts going on, and I was just like, I am sorry. I am so sorry, but we can't possibly represent you if you have a felony. You know, I'm so sorry, but there's just no way that we can represent you if you have a felony record. We had actually been screening people with criminal records. When people call the hotline, we'd send out a form for them to fill out, asking them questions about their experience with the police. And one of the questions was, have you ever been convicted of a felony? We weren't even talking to anybody who had been convicted of felonies because we felt we couldn't represent them. We knew that if we had a named plaintiff who had a drug felony, law enforcement would argue in the media, well, of course we should be keeping our eye on him. He's got a drug felony. We knew the media would be all over, taken through his criminal background. We knew we wouldn't be able to put someone on the stand with a felony record without them being cross-examined about their criminal history in front of the jury and having the credibility challenged. And so I tried to explain this to him, say, I'm sorry, it's not right, it shouldn't be this way, but we just can't represent you. Throughout the entire litigation, he keeps trying to explain, I keep apologizing. Finally, he becomes enraged. And he says to me, you're no better than the police. You're no better than the police. The minute I tell you I'm a felon, you just stop listening. You can't even hear what I have to say. It's like, what's to become of me? What's to become of me? It's like, I can't get a job anywhere because of my felony record. I have to live in my grandma's basement because I can't get housing. No one will take me in. I can't even get food stamps. How am I supposed to even feed myself as a man? He says, good luck finding one young black man in my neighborhood they haven't gotten to yet. They've gotten to us already. And he snatches all those papers and all those detailed notes, and he just starts ripping them up, tossing them in the air. It's snow and white paper in my office, and he walks out yelling at me, you are no better than the police. I can't believe I trusted you. Turns around and takes off. Well, several months after that, I'm public access television show in his neighborhood, public access TV, because we were trying to organize several thousand people to attend a protest against racial profiling and get on buses and go to this major demonstration. And so we were broadcasting live.